So you're wondering, how can you mix NextJS 13 and Redux inside of a project? Well, it's not that complicated, and I made this video which will be perfect for you because I'm going to show you exactly how to do that. Before we get into the video, if you could leave a like and subscribe, I would massively appreciate it. Remember that the code will all be in the description as always, and let's get into the video. Before we dive into today's video, I want to take a moment to talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an amazing online learning platform that has literally transformed my approach to coding. One thing I love about Skillshare is the freedom that it gives everyone to improve individual skills that they're lacking. I ended up taking this fantastic course called Modern CSS, Writing Better, Cleaner, and More Scalable Code by Harry Roberts, and I remember it helped me massively with improving that specific set of skills that I was lacking, and I remember it helped me massively to improve that specific set of skills which were my weak points, which is CSS. But maybe for you it's not about CSS, maybe for you it's about something else, like developing your personal branding or mastering video marketing, or it doesn't have to be related to programming. Skillshare can be a game changer. But here's the cool part. It doesn't matter how advanced you are in each skill, Skillshare will have a course tailored for you. And again, it's not just about CSS or coding. It offers thousands of inspiring classes from everywhere, from illustration to entrepreneurship. The best part of all of this is that you can basically access all of this for free, because Skillshare is offering a 1-month free trial for you to explore and learn from their incredible class library. That means that you can use that 1 month to sharpen up your skills, take a look at their platform, and see if you enjoyed it. Like I said, I've used Skillshare in the past, and I really enjoyed the way they approach teaching, so I couldn't recommend it enough through their courses. So if you're interested, sign up for the free trial. I have a link in the description. I really appreciate Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Now let's get into the tutorial. Okay, so as you can see over here, I have a NextJS project. Now, this over here is a Next 13 project. It was installed using the Create Next App CLI. I already have some of the code already pre-written over here, but none of the code is actually Redux code. I'm gonna show you guys everything from scratch, right? I just made all of the initial code in Next.js so that I wouldn't spend time doing that, and I would just focus on implementing Redux into a Next application. So the example I want to show to you guys in order to teach you guys how to implement Redux with this is something similar to this. I have my home page over here, right? Which if I go into my project, it is the initial route in my Next application. And then I also have this component called login. Now, if you are familiar with Redux, you would understand that Redux is a state management tool, and it will allow us to be able to handle our states and our functions and everything related to consumed and distributed data inside of our project in a very simple manner, without having to pass data through props, without having to pass different states and commonly used variables throughout props in our application. So I created this example where we want to have some sort of information, some sort of state that is going to represent the authentication of a user. So obviously I'm not going to show full-on exemplified authentication here. What I'm going to show you guys is a very simple login component, as you can see. And in this login component, we can just type a username for the user logging in, click on the button to log in. And what that should do is actually set the user to be a specific user that we want to create. And with that change, we should see the variable for the state of the user, or the username variable, changing its value as well throughout our application. We're also going to add other functionalities like logging out, and also having a moderator status as one of the fields in the user object. Now, all of those is just to add more depth into the tutorial, but I'll start off by just installing Redux into our project. Now, like I said in the title and in the beginning, in this video I'm going to be teaching Redux, but I'm going to be using Redux Toolkit, which is basically a library which provides you a set of tools to simplify Redux in your applications. Now, Redux Toolkit is a very commonly used library out there. I believe it is the best option to be using whenever you're coding in Redux. So if it's the first time you're actually trying to code with Redux, just keep in mind that you don't have to worry, you don't have to learn how to use Redux without Redux Toolkit. Redux Toolkit is enough, and it actually makes the experience better. So I'm gonna open this up over here, our terminal. I'm currently running the project in this terminal, as you can see, but I'm gonna open up another terminal inside of this so we can install our packages. And obviously the first one I want to install is the at ReduxJS /toolkit, just like this. Now this one is going to be for the Redux Toolkit package, and the next one is the React Redux package, just like this. And those are the only two I'm going to install. I'm going to press enter. It installed everything. We're going to save it like this. Then what I want to do is I want to create a part in our project, like a folder in our project that is going to hold everything related to Redux. Now I'm going to create it outside of the app folder and inside of our source folder. I'm just going to call it Redux, just like this, and it will exist as a sibling to our app folder. Now over here, we're going to create a bunch of things, but mostly everything related to Redux. So everything, every slice, every feature, everything you create inside of Redux will go inside of this folder. Now, the first thing I want to create is our store .ts file. Now, this file over here, it is used to basically create the store that is going to hold all of our states and variables inside of our Redux application. So it is essential that we do the following. We first just import in the top from Redux Toolkit. So I'll say from at ReactJS Toolkit. By the way, I'm using TypeScript, so I will show you guys how to implement everything with TypeScript. And this already comes with types, so you don't have to worry about that too. So what we want is the configure store function. And then over here at the bottom, we'll just say export const store. So we'll create a variable called store and set it equal to the configure store. And over here, we can set a bunch of things that are related to configurations to our Redux store. But the only thing I'm going to be actually setting to you guys is I will be adding some reducers to this, or just one reducer in our case. A reducer is basically just a function that takes in an action and the previous state of the application, and then it makes some changes to that state and it returns that new value for that specific state. So what do I mean by that? Well, reducers are basically, they have access to the current value of different states, so different variables, and it can take in as well some action, which is just something that some data that you can use to change that state. And this is fundamentally important for any Redux application. So right now we haven't created any reducers yet. So that's what we need to do right now. So to do that, I'm actually going to create a folder over here inside of our Redux folder called features, like this. And inside of this folder, we're going to create what is known as our slices. So whenever you want to have different groups of variables and states that are grouped together, and you want to access in a variety of places in your app. So similar to what I mean is like whenever you have a group of variables and states that you want to be passing through a bunch of components and you want to have a centralized store that is going to have access to those values without having to prop drill all of them, you would create a slice for that. Now we were dealing with authentication, right? So we can create a auth slice just like this. So I'll just create this variable, this file auth slice.ts. And inside of here is where we deal with a lot of configuration. First, we're going to import at the top two things. We're going to import from at ReduxJS. Oh, I can type today. So at ReduxJS, we're going to import the create slice function and also the payload action type. Now, again, like I said, we're dealing with TypeScript. So this is why I'm importing this over here, because I'm going to show you guys how to also put the types correctly. So then what we want to do is we want to create our auth slice. So I'm going to create a variable called auth and set it equal to create slice, just like this. Now over here, we're going to pass in an object. And inside of this object, we have to specify a couple of things about this slice. First, a name. I'm going to call it auth. Then we need to pass in an object called the initial state. Now the initial state will be basically just an object containing the initial values of all of the states related to this slice. So in this specific slice, or the authentication slice, we can only store values for one piece of data. It can be a string, it can be just a number, it can be a Boolean, or it can be an object containing all of those other options, which is what we're going to do. We want to keep track of a bunch of things, not just one. So we're going to create this object called initial state, which is going to be, it's going to contain a value property over here. just to represent the value of our initial state. And inside of value, we're going to have, first of all, a variable called isAuth, which will initialize as false, because we will need to know in our app if the user is authenticated or not. Then a variable called username, just like this, which will be a string. Then a variable called UID. And I'm not actually going to build all of this. Like, I'm just using all of this as an example for you guys. Sort of something that might happen in an actual app. And finally, I'll create a variable called isModerator just to show you guys. It will also start as false. So I can just pass over here the initial state. And in JavaScript and in TypeScript, when you have an object with a name equal to the name of the variable you're setting it equal to, you can just straight up condense it like this. Now, one thing we need to know is that since this is TypeScript, we do need to specify the type of this. So what I want to do is I want to create over here two types. One called the initial state. So I'll create a type called initial state. And what it will be is it will just have a single variable called value, and it will be equal to the auth state type. Now, if you're not using TypeScript in your NextJS application, I would find it weird if you're not, because it is extremely important to use TypeScript in any kind of applications, in my opinion, and especially with NextJS, they make it extremely simple for you to integrate it. But if you're not, then just skip me creating these types. You don't have to do that. You can just set it equal like we were doing before. So what we want to do is we want to create the auth state type. So I'm going to say type auth state. And then for this, what we want is an isAuth boolean, just like this. Then a username, which will be a string. And then a UID, which will be a string. And then finally, a isModerator, which will be a string as well. And now what we do is we just set initial state over here to be as the initial state type, as you can see. And then the value as well, we can set it as the auth state type. It's giving us an error because I just realized I set this to string instead of boolean. But you can see it is working. Now I want to set the reducers to this slice. Like I said, reducers are actual functions that take in a state and an action and returns or does some sort of change into our state. So what do I mean by that? Well, we want to have a couple functionalities, like I mentioned, right? We want to be able to log in, to log out, and also to change the value of the isModerator to between true to false and false to true. So those are the three things we want to do. Now, the first thing is let's just write the function for logging out. Logging out is actually extremely simple because all we want to do is whenever you log out, you want to erase all of the values in the in your state to be equal to its original value, which is of the initial state. So technically, we just want to set it to the initial state. So to create a reducer function for that, we need to create a function over here called logout, just like this. And then over here, we need to return whatever new value of the state we want to have. In our case, since we're logging out, we're resetting all of the values to the initial states. So I can actually just return initial state over here. So whenever someone clicks and calls this function, it will return and turn the state back into its initial value. Now, this is the format of how a reducer looks like, right? It's a function, and whatever you return over here, whatever object you return over here, will be the new value of the state, which we have over here, right? So now we want to create the login. The login is a little bit more complicated because login will take in the two arguments to the function, something that the logout function didn't. It didn't take any arguments. So like I said, we'll have a state argument and also an action argument. Now an action will be of type payload action. That's why we import it at the top. And what I want is I just want to be able to write a username over here in this input. And this is the only thing we're going to send back into our login. So we can put the type over here of this function as a string because we're just going to send back to here just a string containing the username. So we can just specify it as a string. Now, what I want to do is I want to return, whenever you try to log in, I'm going to return its new value for the state. Now, its new value will contain obviously the value property, just like it has over here. But inside of that, we're going to have the following keys. We're going to have an isAuth that is now going to be true because you're logging in and not false. Then we're going to have a username, which is now going to be equal to the action.payload, because action.payload will contain whatever we pass in as an argument to the login function inside of this component over here. Then finally, we're going to have a UID. And to be honest, I just realized it has no purpose of this. I'm just going to set it to whatever, like whatever. In a real application, obviously, you would generate an ID and pass it over here. And then finally, isModerator. I'll continue making it false because, again, we want to toggle, only make it a moderator whenever we call the toggle moderator function that we're going to create in a bit. Now, what do we do with this? Well, we have both the logout and the login things, right? And we have the state value over here, but we're not really using it. So we can actually just remove it like this, or even keep it if we want to, but we're not actually using this in our application or in this function at all. So now that we have both of this, I'm actually going to implement this and show you guys how to use this inside of our component before coming back and creating the functionality for toggling the moderator. The reason for that is because I think if I do everything at once, it won't have a correct flow to the tutorial. And if I come back and show you guys how to continue doing this, it will reinforce the knowledge that we're gaining right now. How do you actually use this elsewhere? Well, you have to come down here at the bottom and you have to actually do something really weird, which is to export all of our functions based on this auth.actions variable over here. So we'll export our login and our logout function by just adding this line of code inside of our file. And finally, we also need to export our reducer. So we'll say export default auth.reducer, just like this. Now we can come back over here to our store, and in our top over here, we'll just import the auth reducer that we just exported from our features /auth file. And what that means is that I can just come over here and just pass in the auth reducer as one of the reducers of our store. Now I'll export some types over here at the bottom. The reason for that is, again, we're dealing with TypeScript, and dealing with NextJS, TypeScript, and Redux Toolkit is actually a bit complicated because of the types. So don't worry if you're not using TypeScript, you don't have to do what I'm doing right now. But if you are, this is important. We need to get the type specifically for this store. So, and because we're gonna be using it elsewhere. So I'm gonna export a type called the root state of our application, and I'm gonna call the return type, just like this. And this type will have a type of store. We're using our specific store, and we're going to use the value get state, just like this. Then we're going to export another type down here, which is going to be the app dispatch, which you might know it will be used in our dispatch function, which is part of Redux. And we just actually want to get the type of store.dispatch, just like this. Now that we have this done, you might think we can start using all of this inside of our code, inside of this component over here, but that's actually not true. Here's the part that a lot of people get confused with when setting up Redux. We have to pass in a provider with our store, right? But where are we going to put that? Well, we're going to put that inside of our layout file, and actually inside of here. But to do that, we do have to create a provider component that is going to handle all of that inside of our Redux folder. So I'm going to create over here a provider.tsx file. And inside of this, we're going to, first of all, this is going to be a client component, which is important for you guys to understand, because for you accessing stuff related to Redux, it has to be in a client component. Remember, in NextJS, if it's a server component, you can't access stuff like browser events and React states, or stuff like Redux states as well. So we do have to set this as a client component. And then I'm going to import the store that we just created. So I'm going to say /store, and I'm going to import the variable. Then we're going to import from React Redux, not even Redux Toolkit. We're going to import from React Redux this thing called the provider. And this is just going to wrap around our actual component that we're creating. We're going to export, just like this, export a function. Let's call this Redux provider. And then inside of this, we're just going to return the provider wrapped around with its children. So we're just going to pass in children over here. And children will obviously, it obviously means whatever components we wrap this Redux provider component around. And we get it by props, right? So over here at the top, we're going to have a prop. It's going to be children. And we do have to give it a value. So we'll just, its type will just be children. And it will be a React node. So I'll say React node. Again, this is all TypeScript, this thing over here. So if you're dealing with JavaScript, no need to worry about that. But you see there's a red squiggly line over here because we do have to pass in our store to this provider. And that's why we actually created another component that wraps around this provider over here. So now that we have that done, we can actually come to our layout over here and just inside of the body, this is important. Inside of here, we could just pass in our Redux provider component and wrap our children around with this. And it automatically imported in the top, the Redux provider thing. So you don't have to worry about that. But now that just means that we have our code working and set up working for us to actually start using the functions that we created over here. So now in our page.tsx, we go to our login. And if we want to access those functions, all we have to do is, first of all, import them. So I import them at the top over here. I'll import from, I'll go back to the beginning and grab the Redux folder and then grab the features folder and then the auth slice, just like this. And over here, we're going to get the logout and the login functions. So logout and login. Now, one thing is important. Wherever you use it, right, you have to make it into a client component. I already made it pre-recording the video. You see both the home and the login components have the use client thing at the top. So make sure you do that. If you're running into a bug, maybe you didn't do that. So make sure you did. Now that we have those functions, if you're familiar with Redux, you would know that we can't just call them directly. We actually have to use something called the useDispatch hook. So over here, I'm going to import from at Redux Toolkit. Actually, it's not Redux Toolkit. My bad. It's React Redux. We're going to import the useDispatch hook. Now, the useDispatch hook allows us to grab this function called a dispatch function, which can be used to dispatch functions that we have in our reducer. So I'll come over here and create a dispatch variable and set it equal to the useDispatch function. If you recall, when we were setting up our Redux stuff over here, you remember we exported this type called app dispatch, and here is where we're going to actually use it. We're going to come over here, and this use dispatch, if you're using TypeScript, will be of type app dispatch. So you see I imported over here at the top the type that we used, and now we can use this dispatch function. So what we need is, we want to, whenever you log in into your application, we want to first of all grab the state of whatever you're typing on that input, which I already have over here. I created a state called username, as you can see, and whenever you type on this input, it should be setting that state equal to the value. And we want to send that back to our slice, because here in our login function, we'll get that value and then set the username of the user equal to that. So let's test out to see if that will work. I'll call the dispatch function over here, and then I'll call the login function just like this and pass in the username. Now, when I click, I need to pass obviously this button over here. On click, I'll pass in the onClick login function. Now, when we click on this, it should actually send that information and save it in our store. Now, how are we going to check to see if that's the correct information? Well, I actually want to display the username of a user whenever they log in inside of our page.tsx. So over here, I want to have a header tag saying username is equal to something, right? So in order to do that, we have to get the current value of the initial state, or the auth state. So how do we do that? Well, this is where we're going to be using something called a selector. So we'll come over here at the top and we'll import from React Redux. So from React Redux, we'll import something called the use selector, which is another hook similar to the use dispatch. And inside of here, we'll just const username. We're going to get the username and set it equal to the use selector hook. And this use selector hook, we can just grab the state directly from here, return back that state, and specify what part of that state do we want to get and set equal to this variable. So we want the username. So in order to get that value, we just say state dot auth reducer, because we have to specify which reducer we're talking about. In our case, we only have one, right? If you go to our store, you'll see we only have one, but we do have to specify in case we have more. But we'll say auth reducer dot value, because now we're accessing the state of that thing and we have a value in there, dot username. So that's the actual flow of it. Now it's saying state of object unknown. And the reason for this is because the use selector, you have to set some types to it, if you recall. And the reason for this is this having a red line is a TypeScript error. And the reason for this is because we do have to actually set some types to the use selector. What I like to do is I like to come to our store over here, and I like to create another version of the use selector hook and call it something like use app selector, something like that. So I'll create a version of that by just exporting const use app selector, just like this, and then setting it equal to the use selector hook from React Redux, but instead we'll use that root state definition over here to make it work for us. So I'll say this is a typed use selector hook, so typed use selector hook of type root state, because we do have to specify that this is related to our store. So now instead of using the use selector from React Redux, we're actually going to use the use app selector that we created in our Redux store. Sorry about that. I should have done that before. I completely forgot that we have to change that. But you see now, it should even have autocomplete now. Like if I were to delete this and I said just state and I put dot, you should see it's already autocompleting us like auth reducer, dot value, dot username. So it seems to be working. Now I want to display the username value over here. And it is that simple for us to get from our store. You should see that now we have username, but it's not actually displaying anything. But because we previously set up our login functionality by using the use dispatch hook here in the login component, we should see that if I type here my username to be PedroTech and click login, we should see the change happening over here, which is great. Now that this is pretty much set up, the next part of the tutorial is just going to be really quick and easy because most of the setup is already done. So if you want to add more slices, more functions, more whatever, it's actually pretty quick. For example, if I want to log out, all I have to do is just add a dispatch over here and call the logout function. Since we already set up the logout function, you should see that, oh, I forgot I also have to pass this as a on click to the logout button, just like this. But since we already set up the logout functionality, when I click on this, you should see it erased the actual username and it seems to be working, right? Now we want to add the toggle moderator status. Now, in order to do that, I actually want to have over here in our page another h1 tag, which will just basically say, okay, if this user is a moderator, it should display a message saying this user is a moderator. If not, it should not display any messages, just to check to see if this value is actually working. So to do that, I'm gonna again get the isModerator variable from our state. So I'll just change this to isModerator and change this to isModerator over here as well, just like this. And I'll say, okay, if isModerator is true, then I'm going to display a message saying this user is a moderator. Now, of course, this message won't be displayed because we haven't added the functionality to turn this user into a moderator, but we should do that right now. Now, to do that, we'll just come to our auth slice over here, similar to what we did before, and we'll just add a new function inside of this. We can call something like toggle moderator, and it will take in the state because we do have to access the current value of isModerator to change its value, but we don't need to send anything from the components, so we don't need the action. Over here, all we want to do is we just want to change the value of the state.isModerator to be equal to the opposite of its current value. We also have to say state.value.isModerator actually, and then set it to the opposite of what it currently is. So if it is false, it will become true. And if it is true, it will become false. Now you might realize that I'm not returning anything. Well, this is because with Redux Toolkit, if you mutate a variable from the state just like this, it will automatically return that and it will recognize this as a correct method to do so. Now, one thing you can't do is do something like state equals to something, something, something. You can't do that. You have to either return a new object with the new state or mutate the state like this. So this is important because it causes a lot of confusion for a lot of people. Now, what I want is I have our auth slice. We made this toggle moderator function. I want to pass this over here into our actions so we can access it elsewhere. Wait, it's toggle moderator, not moderators. So I'll just save this. Now in our login over here, I want to import this from here as well, toggle moderator. And I'll pass this inside our on-click toggle. So I'll say dispatch, and then not dispatch event, just dispatch, and then toggle moderator, just like this. And why does it say it can't? Oh, I wrote it wrong. Actually, I wrote it right. I wrote it wrong before. I apologize for that, guys. I misspelled the word dispatch, but it doesn't really matter because this is a variable that we created. See? But yeah, I'll pass the on-click toggle into our toggle moderator status button. So I'll say on-click toggle over here. And you should see that if I log in again, I'll say PedroTech. We should see our username. And now if I click on this, we should see that it says this user is a moderator. If I click again, we won't be. If I keep clicking, we will be. Now, the final thing I want to do is just add a little bit of use selector into the login component as well, so that we only display the toggle moderator button over here at the bottom when the user is logged in. Because technically you shouldn't be able to toggle your moderator status if you're not even logged in, right? So all we have to do just as a final reinforcement of how to use the use selector is we just copy all of this over here, paste it inside of this, just like this. And then obviously change this to is auth. We want to know if the user is authenticated or not. We want to import the use app selector over here as well. And we want to access the value of the is auth variable. Then over here, we're just gonna check to see if the user is authenticated or not. And if it's not, then we don't even want to display anything. So I'll just grab this and put it directly over here. And you should see that this would also work because now we're not logged in, right? There's no username. It doesn't even show the option to toggle a moderator. But if I logged in as PedroTech again, you should see that the option appears and I can toggle between the status and I can log out as well. So this is basically it for the video. This is how you introduce and implement Redux and Redux Toolkit into NextJS 13. If you liked the video, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting twice a week and I would massively appreciate it. Thank you so much for watching the video and thank you Skillshare for sponsoring this video. They are a really good platform. I've been sponsored by them for a while now, and you know I only recommend products that I personally use. So I'm glad to have them again as a sponsor, and you guys should really check them out because it is a really nice service. So with that in mind, thank you for watching the video. I see you guys next time.